You're listening to
Catholic Sprouts,
the daily podcast for Catholic kids that strives to plant seeds of faith. Hey there, Sprouts. Today is Wednesday, August 14th, 2019. It is also the feast day of St. Maximilian Kolbe. Now, St. Maximilian Kolbe was a Franciscan priest who lived in Poland during the reign of the Nazis in Europe. He did amazing things. St. Maximilian Kolbe was incredibly devoted to our Blessed Mother and incredibly devoted to serving people and bringing them closer to Mary and through her, Jesus Christ. St. Maximilian Kolbe printed a newspaper to help people come closer to Mary, and he even sent brothers and went himself to Japan to spread the faith there. However, he was soon arrested by the Nazis once they took over Poland. He was sent to Auschwitz, and while there, he volunteered to die when the Nazis were going to kill 10 people as punishment for the escape of one person from the camp. St. Maximilian Kolbe willingly went to his death and was starved to death in the place of a man that was a husband and a father. St. Maximilian Kolbe is honored as both a saint and a martyr. To be a martyr means that you died for your faith, that you willingly gave your life for Jesus Christ. So St. Maximilian Kolbe is who we are honoring today. Now, this week on the Catholic Sprouts podcast, we have been talking about the teaching authority of the Catholic Church. We have already discussed that the Church teaches with the authority of Jesus Christ, since he is the one that founded our church. This authority has been passed down through the popes, from Peter all the way to Pope Francis today. We also talked about that the Bible isn't enough, that the Bible is the divine inspired word of God, that it is the most amazing way for us to pray, but it doesn't specifically address a lot of the social issues that we face in the world today. Today, we are going to talk about how the church has always taught with authority, and how even shortly after Jesus ascended into heaven, the church, with Peter as Pope, was asked to do this exact thing. So a little bit of history for you. While Jesus was here on earth doing his public ministry, he mentions many times that he has come to preach and convert the Jewish nation. Jesus himself was a Jew, and he was there to convert the people who saw Abraham and Jacob as their ancestors. After Jesus rose from the dead and ascended into heaven, he ordered his apostles to not only preach to the Jews, but to also preach to the Gentiles. Now, Gentile, it refers to pretty much anyone that's not Jewish. So the pagans, people living in places like Rome, or even in places like what's modern day England or Africa or Asia, all over the place, pretty much everyone. They were charged to spread the faith to everyone. But there was a confusing point that they really had to wrestle with. So Jesus was Jewish. Jesus had followed Jewish laws about purification, like certain types of washing. Also, Jewish laws about the way that you dedicate a baby to God when he is born. There's very specific rules about how you live as a Jew. They also had restrictions on what types of food they could eat, what types of meat. The question was, were these rules of the Jewish faith now part of the Christian faith? When they went out to places like Rome, did they have to convert people not only to Christianity, but also to the laws of the Jewish faith? They wrestled with this. They prayed about it. They consulted what they remembered Jesus had said while on earth, and then they taught with authority. You can imagine this is a big deal. It was a huge sin for a Jewish person to eat pork. That was a huge sin. And yet, through prayer through discussion, the leaders of the church, the early church, said that those rules no longer applied. That when people were converted to Christianity, they did not have to also take on all the rules and laws of the Jewish faith. Now, this was not done without consequence. Many of the Jews that had converted were outraged that they would throw away all of these very important rules that they had lived with their whole life. And yet, Peter taught with authority that these things, these rules of the Jewish faith that we don't follow as Christians, we don't follow them because Peter prayed, reflected, and then taught with authority, and therefore those laws, those parts of the Jewish faith were left behind. And so, Sprouts, I know that's a little bit old history, but this is what the church continues to do today. When there is a point of contention, something we're confused about, the church comes together, the leaders, including the Pope, they pray, they discuss, they even debate, and then they teach. This is what happened years ago. The Mass used to only be said in Latin, in the language Latin. They came together, they decided that, hey, in fact, it can be said in any language. You can certainly still go to Masses in Latin, but it can also be said in English and French and Portuguese and every other language. So the church came together, made a decision, and taught. And so, Sprouts, I have a challenge for you today. I want you to continue to pray for our church. Pray that God can actively work in our church and that our hearts can be softened to the sound teachings of this church.
That's it for Catholic Sprouts today. We'll be back tomorrow, but until then, continue to grow in your faith and truly sprout into the beautiful creation that God intended you to be. A quick reminder to grown-ups, if you are part of the Catholic Sprouts Patreon community, there is a free printable to go along with this week's episode. It is an incredible coloring page of our first pope, Peter the Apostle. I also want to remind you that there is a wonderful study guide for you to help take these topics of the church's authority and discuss them in a way that applies to your life as an adult. You can find all these things within the Patreon community. To find out how to join us on Patreon, simply check the notes for this podcast episode.